and welcome back to my channel, and happy Halloween. We finally made it to Halloween, and this is the last episode of Halloween Horror Nights with me, your host Andrea.M. But if you have been enjoying my scary story narrations, don't worry, I'm soon to be launching a second channel that is going to be dedicated to just story narrations because I have enjoyed it so much over the spooky season period. And I'm also going to be including on that channel not only viewer submissions, scary stories and things I find on the internet, but my own scary novels that I wrote years ago on a little app called Wattpad. And there will be a new episode every week continuing on with those novels. So I'm super excited about that. If you're wondering what my costume is today, well, it's kind of a costume and kind of not. We actually had these beautiful flower crowns and this lovely cloak that was so generously made for all of us that were in Bianca's wedding. So this is what we had for Bianca's wedding. I'm actually wearing a Stranger Things t-shirt and jeans underneath it. But I had a beautiful dress for the wedding and we had these flower crowns and our cloaks. And everybody commented that I looked just like a fairy, so I decided to come as a fairy queen for our very last Halloween Horror Nights. And what an amazing spooky season it has been. So there have been a few developments over the weekend concerning Halloween for us in my location. Halloween night is set to be anything but what you'd expect for a usual Halloween. We are expecting very high temperatures. There is to be a very large storm at the end of it as well. So yes, you'd expect that. But we're kind of going to curtail our activities for Halloween. But we are going to be doing something. It's just not going to be our original plans because I don't do well in the heat. And I'm actually getting a little hot in this costume. So I'm going to wrap this intro up very soon. But please stay tuned with us. And then, of course, we're back to normal as of this week with our paranormal investigations and things. We just need to make a date. And we've got just a couple of little things that have to be organised with that. Can't tell you what, because as you know, it's a secret. But it's going to be very exciting. And I have so many new things coming for the main channel, as you know. And then we're going to have the second channel with the scary story narrations. And I'm so excited about that. Because as I said before, I love to read and I love scary stories. And I love to share them with all of you. So that's what's coming up. But for today's last episode for spooky season, and I'm kind of sad. I love spooky season so much. I'm always sad when it... Honestly, if I could find that tree in the woods that would take me to Halloween and I could just stay there for a few months in the lovely cool darkness of Halloween, I'd be very happy. I'd happily go live with Jack and Sally. But that's not reality, so we have to get on with things. But for our very last spooky season storytelling episode, I have 15 spooky stories from around the internet that will keep you up tonight. So without further ado, let's just get into these scary stories. And I really need to take this costume off because it's way too hot. And yeah, don't get excited. I have my Stranger Things t-shirt on underneath and just an old pair of jeans that have paint all over them. So I'm pretty casual today under all this beautiful finery that we got to keep from Bianca's lovely wedding. So I'm going to get into the stories right now. And as always, there will be the tracks of soothing rain, fires, crackling, nature sounds. If in fact you are using these stories to help you sleep after you've come home from all your Halloween parties and trick-or-treating and all the good stuff that comes with Halloween nights. And we will be going to screens with scary images, nature images, just anything that helps you relax, whether you're, as I've said before, sleeping or just laying back and listening, or you're doing a little bit of craft work or anything else that you might like to have a little bit of company for, and I'm happy to provide that to you. So let's just get into these 15 spooky stories. And I'll be off camera for that, so yay! And I can take this cloak off. While it is extremely beautiful, it is the most gorgeous shade of Irish green, and as you all know, my family originated in Ireland on both sides. It's hot! It's not made for an Australian almost summer. So let's get into the stories. Let's get comfy, including me. And happy Halloween, everybody. And if you haven't had Halloween yet, or you're still yet to go, please be safe, everybody. Please don't end up as a story on the other things I carry on this channel. I would really hate to see any of you end up on my channel for a mishap or something. So stay safe this Halloween, look after each other, and let's get into the last of our Halloween Horror Nights for 2023. 15 spooky stories that will keep you up tonight. With Halloween just around the corner, it's time to delve into the dark, the eerie, and the unsettling. What better time to celebrate the spookiest and scariest holiday of the year? Here are a handful of truly unsettling stories. Some true, some fabricated, but if you haven't had a good scare yet, it's time to get rolling. Grab a blanket and a hot drink and some candy, and delve into these deliciously spooky, scary stories that will keep you up tonight. Story number 1, 2-sentence horror story. This brief gem comes from Reddit user Atomfarmer. I finally found my wife the kidney she needed. It took forever to track down everyone she donated organs to after the crash. Story number 2, Mum averts danger. Forget monsters, people are terrifying. This camping story from Reddit user More Napkins Please will solidify this. I've posted this on my other account and I'm copying and posting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon and my mum lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains. About a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was. And we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mum. I don't know what about, and I wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mum sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth, because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mum has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter. And mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, as I previously said. They left. No harm was done, and thank the Lord for my mama. 2 girls at a campsite alone, people outside the tent in the middle of the night, and my mum pulled some major badassery. Story number 3, The Ouija Board Knocks Back, by Reddit user Excrement Cranium. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with an Ouija board one night. We had done it before, and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it, as she had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town, things we neither knew nor cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm on the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and so consistent. However, we were still skeptical and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove that he was there with us. It went to yes and then spelled out Knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We all just stared at it silently, and then there was a rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that effing board ever again. Story number 4, Forgotten Memory, by Reddit user Call Me Egg. Growing up, my bedroom was the only one that faced the front of the house and street. When I was about 8 or 9, I woke up to my dad calmly but firmly telling me to get up, go in the bathroom, and lock the door. I was annoyed because I was half asleep, but I listened. Apparently, I was more tired than I realized because I then fell asleep on the bathroom floor. The next morning, I asked my mom what had happened. She seemed oblivious and confused. I looked at my dad like she was crazy, and I asked him why had he woken me up. Then he denied doing it. I was becoming frustrated to the point of tears, but I ultimately let it go. Fast forward to college. I was home one break, and I decided to ask again. I had thought of that night on and off for years, and it still bothered me. This time, my dad goes, I was wondering if you even remembered that. Turns out that a lot of the houses on our block were being vandalised and robbed all those years ago. Someone had broken into the garage and was inside the house. My room was partially over the garage. My dad heard it happen and quietly got me to safety. Police were called. The guy ran. He was never caught, however, and my parents didn't want a terrified kid on their hands, so for years pretended like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't supernatural, but it was unsettling for sure. Story number 5, a Clockwork Orange style break-in from Reddit user Joshsecond. This story didn't happen to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child. This was a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m. she heard a loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and she didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister not to call the police and to let her in. This is where my sister got very suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and they told my sister that the same situation had happened a few streets down. Apparently the couple would do this act to get into people's homes. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew just creeps me out. Some real Clockwork Orange stuff. Story number 6, Phantom Alarms from Reddit user 666, Number of the Beast. When I was in high school, I had a lot of these experiences. At the house my dad lived in at the time, and it was really old, built in the early 1800s. There were plenty of times I'd be sitting in the living room and distinctly hear the cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen. It was just me and my dad that lived in the house, and you could clearly see when his bedroom door was shut and he was asleep, but still hear it. Normally my dad worked from 7 until 3, but occasionally worked a PM or overnight shift. One night he was working until 11. I was 17 at the time. At around 8 o'clock or so, I'm sitting in my room playing Borderlands. And I think I hear footsteps coming from the living room, which was adjacent to my bedroom, and assume my dad got home early. I go back to playing Borderlands. I keep hearing the steps, so I pause the game and listen, and the footsteps are just slowly pacing back and forth between the living room and the kitchen in a steady rhythm. I laid in bed, scared shitless, and actually counted the steps. Each time it took 15 paces to the living room, 15 paces to the kitchen. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. I had another situation at my mother's house about 2 years prior to this. Out of nowhere, my alarm clock would go off at midnight every night. I assumed it was busted and got rid of it. Fast forward 2 years, my mum gets another brand new alarm clock for my room, also when I was 17. Suddenly, alarm goes off at midnight. I thought nothing of it, turned it off. Happened again the next night, and my sister reminded me that the old one I had done that too. So I checked and made sure no alarms were set. Double-checked at 11:56. Sure enough, 4 minutes later my alarm goes off. Freaked out, I threw it out. The next night was my dad's night to have me. I had a buddy of mine over and my dad was working that night. He left for work around 2 a.m. and my friend had brought over an iPod dock to listen to music on. Didn't have the clock set or anything. My friend knew nothing of the last couple of nights, so I knew it wasn't just him messing with me. So, about 2 minutes after my dad leaves, we hear an alarm clock coming from my room. I went in, and you know if you just plug in a clock without setting it, the numbers just blink on and off? Well, it was doing that. As soon as I picked it up, the clock set itself to 12 and then just turned off by itself. So yeah, screw this paranormal shit. I'm not religious at all, but I am 100% convinced that it happens. Story number 7. Mom's scary boyfriend by Reddit user Aett. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating a guy she met on a dating site. That part is fine. I had recently started dating the woman who would later become my wife, and we had met online also. I'll just refer to her as my wife for this story. Anyway, my wife and I never really liked this guy. We didn't think he was mean or anything like that, just a little creepy. He was quiet, he kept his eyes closed a lot, and occasionally said odd things like offering my wife a chocolate, and then popping one in his mouth, closing his eyes, and moaning as he let it melt in his mouth. One time my wife and I were visiting my mom, but she got called into work. So we waited at her house. Her boyfriend was over, but he spent the entire several hours just hanging out in her bedroom with the door closed. Just before Christmas, my mom and this guy started having some difficulties. My wife and I were visiting her for the holidays, and she dropped all of her problems on us, and we listened carefully and told her our opinions, and suggested that she might be better off without him. She had already made her mind up, though, and decided to break up with him on Christmas Eve. We spent the night at my mom's and got up early on Christmas morning to visit my dad at his house. We didn't plan to spend the night at my dad's, but we got snowed in, which was actually a nice Christmas surprise. The next day we left as soon as we could get through the snow, and my wife suggested that we stop by my mom's house on the way so that we could check and see if she was okay. My wife said she just had a really bad feeling about my mom's now ex-boyfriend. My mom's car was in the driveway, but that doesn't mean much because she lives close enough to work that she often walks it and it hadn't snowed in her town. She also never locks her door, which drives me crazy. So we let ourselves in, and that's when we see what looks like blood oozing out of the refrigerator's water dispenser. It had filled up the spilled container and was leaking onto the floor and had made a grotesque puddle. My wife screamed and I freaked out. I fully expected to see my mom's head in the freezer. I nervously opened the freezer to find a bag of frozen cherries that had been opened, crammed into the freezer so that it fell onto the ice dispenser and had melted. Thought my mom was decapitated by her creepy ex-boyfriend. Side note, my mom was completely fine. Story number 8. She heard it through the wall. This haunted story comes from Reddit user GoatbusterBM. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioural issues, but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things, so that I could use it like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m, I heard a small voice saying, "Mom? Mom? Mommy?" I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned on the bedside lamp and asked me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get into our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at our door, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lays down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is warmth in your back? I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me had gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room and have never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Story number 9, You're Lucky I'm Scared Too, by Reddit user Megaman1410. A story about a letter from a burglar who visited their home. Some random thief was in my house who I spoke to and who left me a weird message. I was sitting in my room at like 11:30 p.m, heard lots of sounds downstairs and assumed it was my mom. Heard her walk up the stairs to my room, stop, and I called out to her. She didn't say anything and walked back down the stairs. I went down about a half hour later to find a piece of paper with the words, "You're lucky I'm scared too," on it, and a whole bunch of stuff was missing. I called Mum. She still hadn't arrived home from a dinner she was at with her friends. I called the cops and locked myself in the bathroom. But I think the thief realised that I was home and left. It's probably the most scared I'd ever been when I was hiding in that bathroom. 10. Story number 10. A Ghost Testing the Waters, by Reddit user Mr. Tenor, talking about their first night after moving into a haunted house. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on and off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time and sometimes end up with a knife or two in the wrong drawer. But the strangest, scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in. There were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress, watching a video on my phone, when I get the pins and needles feeling on my feet falling asleep. Except it wasn't on my feet, it was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, good night.
Good night,
Turned off my light and tried to sleep. When I woke up, my closet door was ajar. But other than that, everything else was otherwise untouched. I guess whoever my unseen roommate is just wanted to check out who I was on my very first night. Story number 11. A Reminder from the Past by Reddit user WybieLovat. This story is to warn people about their childhood toys. When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read, something I used to do when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes back under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3 foot high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in, I shift to get a more comfortable position and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped my shit, hit my head on the low ceiling and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no colour left on my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that I just happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his belly again, though, there was nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me wet my pants. Story number 12, a warning. This story comes from Reddit user MynamesnotChase. I saw a dead soldier's ghost in my barracks room before I deployed. It was the guy's room who died on my company's last deployment, and I was the first to be issued it. He told me to be safe. He had half a head. I'm agnostic, but that makes me question him. I had 2 other experiences that I'm not quite convinced about, but my great-grandma used to visit me in my dreams after she died for like 15 years. Story 13, the plane ride that never ends. Reddit user Worchester Street shared this story about losing track of time on a continental flight. I've been flying for almost 30 hours and the flight attendants won't stop crying. 30 hours ago, I hopped on a late-night flight from New York heading to Los Angeles. After boarding, I saw that I had an entire row to myself. Takeoff passed without incident, and soon I was stretched out for a nap across the row. I slept for a few hours, I don't know how long, but I woke up to some severe turbulence. It's possible that the lights in the cabin went out for a moment, but I was so disoriented that it's hard to say. I checked my phone to see that it was 4:03 a.m., which I figured gave me about an hour until we landed. When I looked out my window, I was shocked to see nothing but wide open ocean. My jaw dropped. There's obviously no ocean between New York and Los Angeles. I hit the button to call the flight attendant and spent the next few minutes racking my brain for a lake that could have been possibly big enough to explain what I was seeing. I jumped when the attendant flipped off the light. She was grinning from ear to ear, and tears were pouring down her cheeks. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. I froze for a moment at her reaction before deciding to just ask my question. Where are we? Why does it look like we're flying over an ocean?" She wiped her cheeks to clear the tears, still grinning wildly. "Sir, we'll be landing in about an hour." Okay, thank you," I said. After she left, I checked the clock on my phone again. 4:03 a.m. blinked back at me. It hadn't changed. I had to have been waiting with my call light on for at least 5 minutes. How was it possible that it hadn't changed at all? I opened up my laptop and saw that it too displayed 4:03 a.m. I pulled out my phone, started a stopwatch in the app, and spent the next 2 hours looking back and forth between the clocks, waiting for them to change. They never did. I tapped the shoulder of an older woman sitting in the row ahead of me. She looked back, an annoyed expression across her face. "Yes?" she asked. "Do you know how long until we land?" I asked. She narrowed her eyes. "That flight attendant said it would be about another hour." I shook my head in confusion. That flight attendant? We talked almost 2 hours ago. We should have landed already. She stared at me as if I was crazy. I was going to continue trying to convince her, but I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun to see a male flight attendant grinning down at me, tears pinging off his cheeks onto my shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down or I'll be calling the captain." I told him that wouldn't be necessary and sat back. He removed his hand and stepped away. The flight attendants continued to stop by every few hours offering meals. My stopwatch continued to tick up and is now telling me that I've been on this plane for more than 30 hours. I've explored all of coach and tried talking to some of the other passengers, but they've all told me that they're expecting to land in an hour or so. Around 3 hours ago, I tried getting into first class. I made it past the curtain but was escorted back by 2 grinning flight attendants. Their grip on my arms was like iron. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on," one said. "Please remain in your seat with your buckle fastened. We'll be landing in about an hour." I'd just about given up hope when a woman came down the aisle dressed in a business suit. She didn't look at me or slow down, but she dropped a piece of paper onto my tray as she made her way to the bathroom at the back of the plane. I shot a look around before unrolling it. It said, "Are you stuck too?" I pulled out a pen and wrote, "Yes. It's been 30 hours." I folded the scrap of paper up and sat it on the tray closest to the aisle. She left the bathroom and picked it up as she passed. It's been 20 minutes since then. I don't know why, but I don't think the flight attendants would like it if they knew we were talking. It doesn't matter, I have to do something. I'll update you all with whatever happens next. Story 14. A home invader tries every house in the cul-de-sac. This terrifying story comes from Reddit user Suitology. This story is of my parents' old house where I was living with them before college. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighbourhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from main roads and on the weekend, I knew our roads would remain unploughed for quite some time. I went to my outback deck door to look at the snow and the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries and take some pictures when I noticed footprints leading to my door, then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbour's side and thought that one of their more delinquent kids was playing a joke, as my sledding tube on the railing was popped. I decided I'd wait till later as it was too early to call their parents. I went on Facebook and after scrolling for a bit, I noticed one of my neighbours closer to the entrance posted, "Did someone knock for me or something at my back door?" I immediately called her and talked and told her I have an idea. I called the first house on the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked and sure enough, the footprints were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end and they told me there was nothing there. Then I got a call from my next door neighbour. She called the woman that lives next to the end house. She said that there were footprints that led to her door but did not lead away. We already called the police by this point, but now we called them back and said, "It's an emergency situation now." They told us the roads are still all unploughed and they can't send a plough truck to clear the way as they are privately owned. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands, a huge bear of a man, across the road from her texted her to say he was coming over to invite her to his house. He came and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all the exits. Nothing moved, nothing came out. Around 7 p.m. a plough truck came as well as 3 police cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They originally found nothing. She begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the cops went into the basement again, but this time only one came up. He took her to the side room and we could hear hysterical crying, as by now we were all out there. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know exist. A few minutes later, a scruffy man came screaming and kicking, let out in handcuffs, and was taken away. In his little camp out, they found blankets she had just washed and put away, and in the room next to hers. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone, and she sold the house the next summer. He turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for an assault against a family member. The cops told us that they didn't feel like he wanted to stay at his apartment after he had also had a fight with his roommate and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck in our unploughed roads. That is why you should always make sure your doors are locked. Story number 15. I See Everything, by Reddit user Panda. I was with my little brother home alone when we heard a creepy voice from the other room saying, Panda, come here. I want to talk to you." We didn't know who or what it was and immediately ran upstairs. While we were running to our room, we heard someone nearby say, "Do you boys think you can run from me? I see everything." At this point, we were terrified, locking the door to our room, grabbing our mini baseball bats and crying. We were certain we were going to be killed or eaten by some monster. Then it happened. A loud bang came from the closet, and the monster sprang out. We both screamed. My brother fell, and I threw the bat at my dad, wearing an It clown mask and laughing hysterically. Turns out he was behind the whole thing. First, he had put all the cordless phones in the house on speaker and said he was leaving the house to run some errands. Then he proceeded to sneak back into the house, hide in our closet, and scare us. And that brings us to the final story in the final of our Halloween Horror Nights for 2023. Have a happy Halloween, everybody. Stay safe, sleep tight, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much for listening.